In the case of this problem here, what I want you guys to do is not think about the problem as a whole. I want you to take the problem and I want you to think about the problem as little small pieces. So each one of these things being a small piece of a larger solution. There are a lot of pieces actually in this program that need to get done. And the way that I really push you guys, that I want to push you guys to implement this homework, is start with the simplest thing you can think of first. And if that means like not even worrying about some pieces of that problem, I think that's fine. The reason why I asked you guys to start with the simplest thing first is, one, it gives you confidence that you can do something. Like, it gives you the ability of saying, hey, I think I have a piece. I know I can do at least this little bit. And also, it gives you a good starting point from where to work. If you don't actually start with something, like even something that's small as, hey, hello world, then it gets to be really hard to move forward from that point. Like, you guys all know how to do a hello world problem at this point. Like, this is something that you can write. Not even worry about loops or anything like that. The first thing you guys should always be starting with on a new project should be something similar to hello world. It should be a program that literally just runs and then exits immediately, does nothing else, right? You should always have that be the starting point, no matter what you're doing. Overwatch started like that. Overwatch started as a console program that just ran and didn't do anything. That's kind of how every program works. Everything had to start from somewhere. So why not start from something that you know? So looking at this problem, here's what I want to do. I want to take this program and I want to break it down into the pieces that I know I can do. I'm going to take this whole thing, and I'm actually just going to put it here. I'm just going to split it up into 3 different lines to start. I'm going to start splitting this up into more. Okay? The first thing, ignoring everything else, is write a program that asks the user to type in numbers. Okay? The second thing is, after each entry, the program should report the sum. And the third is that it should terminate when the user enters 0. So if I take this and I ignore the second and third ones, so if I just take these 2 guys, I just ignore them for now, write a program that asks the user to type in numbers. This is the first part of our program. So if I even break this down and just write a program that asks for a single number and prints it out, that should be one of these tasks. So what I want to think about is, how do I make a list of things that I can do to make this program actually work? And the first step here is to write a program that asks for a single number and prints it out. So I think I can do this first. This will be my first starting point. Without knowing anything else, I'm going to do that as the first thing. This is going to be the simplest thing that I can think of that I can do that will get my program on the way to working. And the reason why I start with this is, again, because that's the first thing that I see. I take the sentence, I'm ignoring everything else. Like, I'm not even thinking about the rest of it. Okay? I think everyone could write a program that asks for a single number and prints it out. We've done it several times so far. This is a program that just does nothing. It runs, and it exits immediately. Right? You guys have all done this too? So now I have a program that runs and stays open. So I want to ask for a single number, and I want to print it out. That's the first thing on this list. Right? Now, when I ask for a number, I need to put it into a variable, remember? And then I'm going to print it out. Does anyone want me to go over this in more detail? I feel like everyone is on the same page with how to do this, right? C in, C out. This is week 1 and week 2 stuff. Okay? This is where I'm starting from. I don't have to make the whole program. I'm literally just doing the smallest piece right now because I know that I can build off of this. You need to have a starting point. So I feel like everyone could have gotten at least this far on the first problem. Like I feel like you could have gotten this because I feel like we've done this several times before. So here we go. Please enter number, 42. And I entered 42. Okay. Any questions on this so far? So I feel like I did this part. Write a program that asks for a single number and prints it out. So the next thing I have to decide is what is the next smallest thing that I can do? Well, it says here, after each entry, the program should report the cumulative sum. I'm just going to ignore the part where it reports the sum. What I do know is that, hey, I need to keep asking for more numbers. Why don't I just take what I've written and make it so that it just repeats over and over and over again? Why don't I make the next thing that I try to do, ignoring this completely still, ignoring the sum, why don't I just have it repeat this forever? Because that's essentially what my program is asking. It's a calculator. It's asking for multiple numbers. And I'm just going to ignore the ability to quit. I'm going to ignore the ability for it to add. I just want to repeat what I just did over and over again. Okay? How do I repeat this forever? Brent, I want to see. Does anyone else know? Let's see. Anthony. While loop? Yeah. Whenever you want to repeat something, remember, you have this concept that's a while loop. I've shown you guys how to repeat something forever, right? You do this while true. This while loop here will repeat whatever's inside of it forever. So why don't I take what I've written here, and I want to repeat this whole thing forever. Everything from this first line to the last line here. Remember the way the while loop works, right? While loop has two parts. The expression of how often you want this thing to loop. As long as this is true, as long as what's inside these parentheses is true, it'll loop. And then what you actually want to loop, which has to be put inside of these curly braces. You can imagine these curly braces basically being like the box that contains everything that needs to repeat. So if I do this forever, I just put this while loop. Even if I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen, all I want to do is see what happens. I want you guys to experiment with this. There's nothing bad that can happen from you writing code and experimenting with it. The worst that's going to happen is it's not going to compile. So now I'll see what I've done. I basically made something that repeats forever. If I imagine in my head, oh, I type 1 plus 2 plus 6 plus 10, and then type in 0, it should exit. I have created this thing that repeats forever. That was the second thing on my list. I want something that repeats this forever. Right? Any questions on this so far? What should be the next thing that I do? I've done this part now. I have 2 more remaining pieces from the program that I was asked for. I should add up all the numbers, and I should exit when I type in 0. Why don't we do the exit part? This part right here, like the sum part is probably going to be the most, has the most pieces to it, but I think I can figure out how to make the program exit when you type in 0. Using the concept of what we learned in class, which is the idea of break and continue, I have a number here. If that number is equal to 0, I can break out of my loop. So why isn't that that should be the next thing that I'm going to do. I'm going to do this one next. The program should terminate when the user enters 0. How do I detect when he's actually entered 0? Well, let's break this up into two pieces. Detect when you have typed in 0 and break out of the loop. Two separate pieces. What do I need to do to detect that you've typed in 0 here? I write an if statement. If that number is equal to 0, I can just print out. So I have my if statement inside of my while loop because I want this thing to repeat over and over again. And all I'm doing is I'm printing out what happens. So I'm going to type in 0. And there's my line for you'd like to exit. So now I know that I can detect when you've typed in 0. I created an if statement that compares the number you typed in versus 0. To exit out of the loop, all I have to do is add a break here. And that'll break me out of this loop that I'm in. Any questions up to this point?
So you don't have to have a break outside of the
Yeah, this break will break even if I had this thing inside of another if statement, like this. Inside of another if statement like this. Let's see. What does the error say, Katie?
A break statement may only be used within a loop or switch.
Do you have this whole thing surrounding, do you have this whole if statement and the break inside of your while loop with the curly braces inside?
Yes.
Let's take a look. You got it? Is it working now? So yeah, you don't have to have this thing be outside here. Outside here.
So breaks only work for loops.
Breaks only works for loops. So even if you have it all the way in here, Jules, like this, it still works. This break, even though it's inside this if statement, inside this one, it looks all the way up to see if you're inside of a loop, and then breaks out of that loop. Okay, so let's run this. Type in a number. I'm going to hit 0. And now it's not asking me for any more numbers. I've successfully broken out of the loop. Questions? Okay. All right, let's move on to the last piece. After each entry, the program should report the cumulative sum of the entries to date. This means I need to add up all the numbers and print out the current sum of all the previous numbers every time I type in a number. So this means that I need to keep track of all the numbers added together every time I enter a new one. Do you guys remember how in class I spoke about the lifetime of a variable and how the lifetime of a variable lives and dies within the curly braces that it belongs to, the statement that it belongs to? So this variable here, it lives and dies every time it goes through the loop. It gets created and then destroyed every time you go through the loop. It gets created here on this line and destroyed here. the next time you repeat this statement, it gets created again and then destroyed again. This number is perfect for keeping track of what you've entered. However, because it's getting created and destroyed all the time, we can't put a variable inside of here to keep track of the sum of all the numbers we've entered to that point. So I need something else that keeps track of the sum of the numbers. So when I think about this specific part of it, you have to kind of think about, like, what do I want? If I was doing this on a piece of paper and I was adding up all these numbers, how would I keep track of the current sum? I would every time I enter a number, I would add it to all the previous numbers, and then I would save that off. And then if you enter a new number, I would add it up to my previous sum, and I would save it off. Thankfully, C++ is very good at that. If I make a variable that lives outside of this while loop here, and I just minimize the while loop, right? This variable's lifetime is between this statement. So it lives on this line and gets destroyed here in this curly brace. That is the lifetime of that variable, which means it persists. Even though this thing is repeating over and over again, this variable only gets created once, which means this variable is going to keep track of all of our numbers to that point. So if I go here, and I take this sum, which starts at 0, and I just add this number to the sum, and then shove this whole thing as an expression back into the sum, I've effectively now added the number on top of all the other numbers. And if I print that out, now my program is done. I'm adding the number to the sum. So watch. I entered 1. The sum so far is 1. Let me do an ENDL here. I'm going to add 10 to it. When I type in this number 10 here, it's going to put 10 . So watch. This little yellow arrow, remember, indicates what I'm going to run next. If I take this guy, number currently has 10 inside of it. What does sum have in it right now? Do you guys remember I typed in 1 before? So sum is equal to 1 right now. So if I take sum and I add number to it, so I take 1 plus 10, I take both of these two numbers and I add them together and put it back into sum, watch what happens to sum here. I'm going to add 10 to sum, shove it back in there, and now sum turns into 11. Okay. I'm going to continue now. What should I enter next? 42. So look at what number is now. It's 42. And I'm going to add 42 to 11. Remember, this variable hasn't changed because this variable is still storing what I had last set it to because it lives outside the while loop. So now I can add these two numbers together again, and sum turns into 53. And then I just print that out to the screen. The sum so far is 53. I'm going to keep going.
If you put in a really, really big number, it goes into a infinite loop.
Yeah. So there, it's adding up numbers. And as soon as I'm done, I can hit 0 because I know that that already works. Okay. Questions on this? Anyone have any questions? Anyone lost on this? I can go over more examples with this if you want. Yeah.
So when you did the variable of sum equals 0,
Yes.
uh,
Up here?
yes, on the bottom you write sum equals plus, which sum is the 0 or both sums the zeros?
You mean where I did this?
Yeah.
Right here?
Yeah, explain that a little more.
So this variable, right, I have a variable called sum, right? That's the name of the variable, is equal to 0 at the start. If I didn't have anything else here, that's what that variable would be. So when I get down to here, these two variables, it's referencing the same variable. So here's what happens. So when you're looking at this line of code, you have to think about it, okay, you have to do the right side first. You have to do the addition first. So the first thing you do when C++ hits this line of code is effectively it breaks it into two operations. One, it does the addition first. So it takes sum, which is currently 0 here. So I'm going to replace this with 0. And then takes whatever you typed in here, which in my case was 1, and adds those two together. That's the first thing it does. After it's done that addition, so it's basically taken 0 here and added it to 1. So that's the result. It then takes the result and puts it back into the variable. That's the second operation it does, after it's already performed the arithmetic. So I take 0 here, and I add it to 1, and I put it into the variable. This right here, this addition operation, is just reading what the value of sum is right now. It doesn't change what sum is yet. It just reads what sum is, which is 0. This operation here, the equals, takes this whole right side and assigns it to this variable. So it changes what the value of this variable is. So this variable, which used to be 0, now becomes 1. So if I walk through this, let me show you what it looks like here. Let's just do one. Let me show you what it looks like from the very beginning, what sum looks like, right? So I have this variable sum. Can you see it's currently 0 right now, right? I'm going to go to a point where I'm going to type in a number here. I'm going to type in the number 1. Okay? So number currently stores the value of 1. That's what it currently stores, right? Sum is still 0 right now. Okay? There's two different variables. I have both of these variables here. Two different variables, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this to this. Okay? I'm going to add 0 to 1. Literally, you can think of it, this is an addition operation that figures out what the result of 1 plus 0 is. What is the result of 1 plus 0? This whole thing gets turned into 1. It does a replacement. It does that arithmetic operation, figures out what the value is, and it comes back and says, okay, this arithmetic operation is resulted in the value of 1. That's what the answer is. So this arithmetic operation now, which is 0 plus 1, gets put into the variable here. So watch what happens to sum up here. It goes from 0 to 1. It changed, right?
Right.
So the next time through the loop, I'm going to type in another number. I'm going to type in 5 this time. So sum is still 1. This is what it was the last time. This only gets assigned to 0 the first time you hit this line of code. So it got initialized to 0. From the last time I went through this loop, I know that sum was assigned to 1. So I get down here and I do the arithmetic operation again. And this time I'm adding the value of 1 to 5, like so. I'm adding these two numbers together. And I'm putting that into the variable, sum. So this variable that I declare up here gets set to 0 only the first time I run the program. It never gets set to 0 again. Okay? And this variable, sum, now from that point on, is going to only be changed whenever I'm adding a number to it.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? Let's do a little bit more on this. How would I change this so it only adds the number if the number that I entered is even? Remember how you can detect if a number is even or odd, right? You can use the modulus to figure out if the number is even or odd. So if I know that I want to see that this number is even, I do this comparison. So I can change when this thing is added to or not by just adding another if statement here. You can add if statements as many times as you want to inside the while loop, and it will repeat this over and over again. Okay. All right. So this is what we're going to do for the next problem. If no one has any other questions, I'm going to move on to the next one.
I did it. Do the while loop.
That's fine too. Okay. Let's move on. Problem number 2. Write a program that simulates a store from an RPG. The program should display a menu offering 4 equipment choices, each labeled with a letter. And if the player responds with a letter other than one of the 4 valid choices, the program should prompt the user to enter a valid response until the user complies. Then the program should use a switch statement to select a simple action based on the user's selection. And a program run could look something like this. Okay. Any questions on how this thing is supposed to work? So you basically are presented with a store that shows you a list of things. And unless you actually type in one of the selections, it's going to repeat this over and over again. So this was a good example of how to use the if statements inside of a while loop to determine whether it's a valid input or not. Now this is basically the opposite of what we did, where instead of breaking the loop, we're going to continue the loop if they typed in something invalid, right? So again, I'm going to break this up into several pieces. The first thing that I see when I see this problem is I need to print out the inventory of basically what this blacksmith is selling. Now, I'm just going to do that using cout statements. I don't want to do anything else until I have that. So I'm just going to print out all the things that are selling. What should our store be selling this time? Oh, I know. We're going to sell a NES Classic on sale. We are going to sell Pokemon Sun and Moon. You're going to get both. What else should we sell here? What are some rare? Kingdom Hearts 3 and Half-Life 3. Yeah, these are all imaginary.
All imaginary.
Okay, that's what our store is going to sell. They can't. They just skip 3 and went straight to 4.
Neither can Square Enix.
This would be a great store. Can you imagine if you found a store that sold all of these? But they're all like $300,000 each, right? It's like crazy eBay.
Yes, it's that much for a game that doesn't exist.
I'd pay that for KH3.
So everyone, I feel like, also should have been able to start from here. Like, you can write a store that just does something that looks like this. This is me just writing 4 cout statements back to back, right? Okay, so if I look here, please, got a selection of good things for sale. I want to read in the choice that they entered and then print that out. That's going to be the first thing I want to do. I'm going to break this problem down. I just want to read in the choice and then print it out, okay? Same exact thing I just did for the other program. I'm going to create a variable that reads in the choice. I'm going to ask for which fictional item do you want to buy for? All right. And I'm going to read that into a variable. In this case, I'm going to use a character, like so, to read that variable choice into. Remember, character is going to be a single letter or a number. So which fictional item do you want to buy? I can type in a character. Cool. And I'm just going to print out the choice that they entered. Same exact thing I just did before. remember, it's not, so the way that I'm approaching this is the same way I did the other one, which is I actually already broke down this problem into the pieces that I know I need, which is to print out the inventory and ask for which thing you want to buy. I'm going to start with that. I'm not even worrying about the loop. I'm not worrying about if they purchase something valid. I'm just going to ask for the thing. So I pick N, and then it exits. So I want to repeat this whole thing forever, okay? So if I wrap this whole thing in a while true, I'm going to take all this cout and the choice. This whole thing gets put inside of my loop. Okay? Questions on this? This is basically what we've already done. So I'm just going to repeat this whole thing, the cout and the choice, over and over again. I'm just going to keep typing in. It doesn't matter what I've entered because I don't care right now. I just want to see that I can type it in and repeat it. Okay? I've gotten to this point. I am working through this problem one step at a time. This is a very... It seems kind of almost overkill a little bit, like taking something like this and breaking it down. But it doesn't matter if you're working on a homework problem or you're implementing a feature or you're making a video game from scratch. You need the ability to take a problem like this and break it down and work on it a little bit at a time. Notice that I'm testing it as I go. I'm not just writing a bunch of code all at once and then hitting go. I tested each one of these things to make sure it worked. All right. So the next part of the problem was I need to detect if they typed in something that's actually valid or not. So how do I know if they typed in valid or not? Well, you think about the last problem. You detected when they typed in 0 or not. So we can do the same thing, except instead of detecting they typed in 0, I just need to detect if they typed in N, P, K, or H. So instead of writing one if statement, I can write several if statements, right? So this is the part that we can do it a lot of different ways, and I kind of want to show you guys two different ways we can do this. One is with multiple if statements, and then another way is with a single if statement and combining those expressions into one. Okay. So I want to repeat this as long as they typed in something that wasn't N, P, K, or H. Which means, in other words, I can leave this loop as soon as they type in one of those. So if my choice is equal to the Nest Classic, which is the letter N, I can do a break. This looks a lot like what we did in the last one, which is if they typed in a number that was equal to 0, you did a break, right? So this is the first way I'm going to show you by using a break. And then I'm going to show you another way to do it using a continue. This will handle it so that now I'm just writing this one if statement. So if they type in N, I'm going to exit out of my loop. What I can do here is I can print out, sorry, all, or no, we'll just say like, you bought a Nintendo Classic. Now go to eBay. Loop is right here, Katie. Sorry, there's only so much that I can show at once. There's my if statement. I compare to see if it's letter N, and this choice is case sensitive. So I'm going to type in F and S and F and N lowercase n, and then I'll type in capital N. And now it's going to tell me that I bought a Nintendo Classic. This allows me to buy a Nintendo Classic And then I can write more if statements for the other cases now. I'm going to repeat this 4 more times, 1 for each item. I'm going to do Pokemon Sun and Moon. I'm going to do this for Kingdom Hearts 3. And I'm going to do this for Half-Life 3. So these are my 4 if statements that I write, 1 for each specific choice.
You can't put the if statement inside the one that you did the first time?
No, you can't, because, well, I'm going to show you another way to combine them all into one, but this is the, hey, I just want to get this thing to work. Like, if you had done this far, it would actually work. Like, it actually behaves like you want it to. I'm going to show you right after this how to combine them all. But I'm writing 4 different ones here. So I'm going to try to buy F, D, P. I'll buy Half-Life 3. And I picked H, and it's going to say I thought Valve couldn't count to 3, which means I bought Half-Life 3. So now I know my program behaves because each one of these if statements takes care of my other conditions. Okay. Now how do I combine these into something that isn't just a single condition? So this works fine because it's 4 different if choices. However, what I actually want is something more like I want to showcase how to set this up using a continue statement. So notice here that there's a lot of these specific. I have 4 different if statements, but there's actually a way you can combine all of these and move this purchasing statement into a switch instead. Because that was actually what the homework had asked you, which was programs should use a switch to select a simple action based on the user's selection. Okay. So this works because I have 4 different if statements. However, what you want to do actually is you want to print out if they actually haven't typed in one of the valid choices. So here we go. Let's do this another way of how we combine these all into a single one. I'm going to take this whole thing, and I'm going to do you guys remember this operation? The logical OR? Combining multiple. I can take this whole thing, and I can write my choice by combining all of my comparisons to 1. And then I'll break out of it. And then what I can do is outside of this, or even inside of this, we can do this inside, I can do my switch statement. So I'm going to write the switch statement, but if you're not sure about the syntax, I recommend you guys look it up. It basically looks a little bit like a while loop. It said instead of while choice, you do switch choice. And at each specific case gets its own line. What if I type in here? So this is the other way you can set up your program, which is you set up a single if statement combining with multiple conditions, and then you use a switch statement inside of there to print it out. There are pros and cons to doing it both ways. I would say that in this case, either is totally fine. This is kind of a convoluted case for the homework specifically. More to practice switch statements and to practice logical ORs. But this is how you would combine them all. Okay. So if I run this, let's just walk through here. I'm going to run the program in, let's type in like J. So choice right now is J. So it's going to go through and compare this J against each one of these letters, N, P, K, and H. And it's not going to be equal to any of these. And remember that the logical OR, remember from last week, in the case of OR, in this specific example, only one of these has to be true, then the whole thing is true. However, in the case of my program here, J is not going to be equal to any of these, which means that all four of these are going to return false, which means the whole thing is false. So I can go to the end of the loop and repeat. So here it is, repeating. Ask for a choice, and this time I'm going to type in N. And so choice is going to be equal to N. So N, it's going to compare N equal to N, and this one is going to be true. So it actually doesn't care about the rest of these in that case, and it's going to be true now once I type in N here, once this variable has N. Then we get to this switch statement, and watch where the yellow arrow goes. It goes straight to here, which means it matches this case, and then breaks. Okay, questions?
You kind of lost me a while back. So.
Which part do you want me to go over again?
Well, I lost track at first.
So why don't we do this? Do you have this much, Katie? The while loop with no if statements or anything like that?
I have the first if statement.
Okay, so you had this, right?
Mm-hmm.
All you need to do is put a break here and then print out that you bought a Nintendo Classic. Like so.
I have that, but I don't know.
And then once you have this, all you want to do is make all the other three if statements. That's good. So that is, I actually don't have that. You see what I have up there? I just say you pick the choice. So I would get rid of that line. Yeah, just that one. And now you have your sword, so that you should write another if statement that's more of your code.
Pretty much copy paste
Yep,
this.
yep. Replace the S with potion. And then OP. You can do what's called pattern matching, which is, yeah, that's it. Hot is sort of a little different. Yes, good. And then you do the other two for armor and one. But before I would go that far, I would just test what you have. You really need to test as often as possible, make sure that nothing else is broken. Okay, that works properly. 0. Great. So it's case sensitive, which means it cares about capitals. Next thing I would test would be a potion. Make sure that works. So because this is homework, I kind of want to go over the last one. I do have more planned, but I do want to give you guys some more practice on doing this stuff. So let's do that for this one. So I want to go over the answer to this. However, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of variation on this to do here in class before we go into lecture, and then I'll give you guys a break. So this program was using the concept of combining input and also what we talked about in class, which was randomly generating numbers. Okay. Randomly generating numbers mixed with looping gets you a nice, easy way to do a dice program. So this lab was asking, hey, I want you to roll either a D4, a D6, a D8, or a D20, and to roll a random number based on how many sides they chose. Then it was to ask them how many dice they want to roll. So the first step here was generating random numbers. So there's two pieces to generating random numbers. Remember from 2 weeks ago, if you guys remember, when you're generating a random number, it needs to be seeded with something so that future random numbers are always different. Remember when I said that anytime you call, there's a function called rand, which if you do nothing else, will always generate the same number. I think it was 41, yeah. This is the same random number from last week. 41. No matter how many times I run this, this is not really a random number so much as it is just print out 41. That's all it's doing. So this right here, being the way that we generate random numbers, means that we need a way to actually use something that changes all the time. So I talked about how to use time as the thing that you want to seed. There is something called srand, which is, it looks like rand, but it stands for seeding the randomizer. And you put in a number here to give it a seed to generate all the future random numbers from. In this case, I typed in 1239, and I got 4084 instead. If I seed the randomizer with 0, I get 38. I seed the randomizer with 1, I'll get a different random number entirely, too. There's my 41, and so on and so forth. But I can't just put in a number here because I do want it to be different every time I run it. If I put in a hard number like that, it'll just be the same random number every time. So my dice rolls won't be very random at all. So instead what you can do is you can feed in time. There's a that library, ctime, and you can feed in time. And time here, let me just show you guys what this prints out. I'm just going to write a true loop, an infinite loop, and I'm just literally going to print out time. Oops. And when you program, you kind of have to be curious because, like, you should kind of feel, you shouldn't feel obligated, but you should feel free to change this and try out different things all the time. Like, look what it's actually printing out here. You see how it's going up by 1 every second? Yeah. Right? That's representing the system time. Every second is getting represented here. This essentially represents date along with hours and minutes as well. So this right here, even though it's printing out a giant number, if I fed this number into my seeded randomizer, it means that every time I run the program, I'll get a different value based on time. So by knowing that, when I go back to my randomizer and my seeded number, there it is, and I feed in time, and this is where I remember that I wanted you guys to know that you can cast this to a static an unsigned integer. But this whole thing is just something you're just going to have to do once and then copy everywhere that you go. But now when I run this, every time that I run this program, I'll get a different number without changing anything. So there's 25524 was 1, 25537, 25550. Remember when I said that also this isn't the greatest randomizer? It seems like every first few numbers are 255. It'll be that way at first, but let's say I call this twice in a row now. It will be different every subsequent time. This is 19418. Those are two random numbers. Look at the second number. Don't look at the first number. And that second number is going to be more random. Right? Every time I'm running this, it's basically generating two random numbers. Okay? And if I put this in a while true, these are all my random numbers that I have here. So why don't I start with, hey, how about I roll a 20-sided dice? How do I get something that gives me a 20-sided dice? How do I take this random number and generate something that is between the numbers of 1 to 20? Remember that there's an operator, the modulus operator, that handles taking a number, no matter what that value is, and giving me back a value between 0 and that number. So rand, if I modulate this by 20, I can be guaranteed that the result will be between 0 and 19. That's what this will always return. Then if I add 1 to it, I'll bump this up from 0 to 19 up to 1 to 20. So this will now roll a dice between 1 to 20. I got 7 there. I got 20 there. 7, 13. Okay. Without anything else, I've basically done the first part of this, which was write a dice rolling program and just roll a d20. Roll a random number based on how many. How would I roll a d? Let's do, this is a d20. I want to set up a d4, a d6, and a d8 now. So this is going to be d4, d6, and a d8. A d4 would be this, d6 would be this, and a d8 would be this. Okay? I'm just literally taking what I've done and changing the modulus. So see here for d4, I'm rolling modulus 4. I'm adding 1 to it though. And for d6, I'm modulus 6, and I'm adding 1 to it. Here are my rolls. Got a 4, a 6, a 5, and 11 on my dice. I'll run this again. Got a 1, a 3, a 7, and a 5. So now I have proven that I can roll. And if I just do this in a while true, this is a pattern you're going to see a lot. I just repeat this whole thing. I take this whole thing and just put it inside of a while loop, this whole series. You can see it's rolling dice forever. Okay. So now I know I can roll any of these dice. So I want to ask, instead of me having these things in the program already rolling for me, I want to ask which one of these do you want to roll. So if I use a cout to say what sided dice do you want to roll, and I stick that into a variable called num_sides, I can take this variable and I can delete all of the rest of this, oops, except for 1. I can place it right here. I can take this right here. I can also replace it with, I can't just put num sides here, but I can combine this. I can put a little guy right here, put the num sides, and then I'll put a space, like so. I just put num sides in right there. So now I've asked for what sided dice I want to roll. Let's roll a 50-sided dice. D50 is a 43. Let's roll a 100-sided dice. 26. Let's roll a 100-sided dice again. 39. Let's roll a 1,000-sided dice. 652. You can imagine that I'm basically rolling for damage. Let's say I want to see if I crit or not. If the number that I roll is higher than 90, that's going to be a crit. Let's see if I crit. I didn't crit there. Let's see if I did it again. Nope, no crit.
What?
Ignore that. 27. 40. How many times is it going to take before I crit? Probably 1 out of every 10 times that I do this, I'll crit. If my number is 90 or higher, I'll crit. But this is basically me rolling damage in a game. Right? I'm rolling a 100-sided dice and I'm looking at that number. I got a crit. So in the program, in here, expand the program by asking them how many dice do they want to roll, and add up the results of all these dice rolls and output at the console. So this is a combination of the first homework and the dice rolling program we just wrote. I want to write a loop that adds up all the numbers that have been rolled on that dice. So this here means I need to write a loop that adds up the dice rolls. So before I get to that though, why don't I just write a loop that just prints out multiple dice. This is going to loop forever, right? I'm going to roll a 100-sided dice, and it's just going to print out all of these. These are my dice rolls. It's looping infinitely. You can stick a while true around anything, by the way. Like, if you see anything, you just put while true and just wrap it in brackets, and you can see how many times it loops. In this case, though, I only want to loop a certain number of times. I want to ask for how many dice do you want to roll? Num rolls. I'm going to assume you're going to roll 0. I'm going to ask for how many dice, how many times do you want to roll it? Exactly the same way I've done everything else. I create a variable, I ask for input, and I stuff it into that variable. They're going to tell me how many times they want to roll it. And then, when I go through this loop, I need a way to only do this loop a certain number of times. So to keep track of this, I'm going to take this number of rolls that they want, and I'm going to actually manipulate it. I'm going to start with this number. I'm going to subtract 1 from it every time I roll a dice. And as soon as that thing hits 0, I'm going to break out of my loop. So I'm going to say if the number of rolls is equal to 0, I'm going to break. And also, I'm going to subtract 1 from it every time through the loop. In fact, I kind of want to do if it's less than or equal to 0, in case they type in a negative number for the number of rolls. If it's ever less than 0, I'm going to break. So I have a number of how many rolls they want to type in. Let's say I type in 10. It's going to loop through this thing, assuming infinite number of times. However, every time through the loop, I'm going to subtract 1 from that number they typed in earlier. As soon as that number that they typed in earlier goes below 0, I'm going to break out of the loop. So I'm going to roll a 100-sided dice. I'm going to roll it 5 times. It did it 5 times and then exited. Let's see that thing actually in action here. Let's go step by step. I'm going to roll a 100-sided dice. I'm going to roll it 5 times here. Roll it 5 times. So number of rolls here, this variable that I typed it into is equal to 5. I'm going to roll 1 dice. That's what this thing printed out. Watch the output here. I've rolled it once. So I'm going to subtract 1 from, watch what happens as the num rolls here. I'm going to subtract 1, goes to 4. And then this if statement compares 4 to see if it's less than or equal to 0. This thing, if it's true, will break out of the loop. It's not true, so it goes one more time. It rolls 1 more dice. There's my second roll. I'm going to subtract 1 from it again. It's going to go down to 3. It's going to repeat this over and over and over again until that number, which is currently at 1, now it's at 0. I've rolled the dice 5 times so far. It's going to go, this if statement is going to be true. It's going to break out of the loop and then exit. All right. Okay.
So what you can do is choose multiple dice rolls.
Multiple dice rolls? What do you mean? Sorry.
Like choose a 4-sided dice and a 20-sided dice.
Oh, you mean and pick multiple ones? Yeah, we can do that. That's a great practice. But I'll show you how to do that.
Yeah.
So we're not done yet, though, because while we're rolling 5 dice, I'm rolling 100-sided dice 5 times. I need to add up all of these. Remember, these are damage rolls. If you've ever played D&D or anything know that, you know that sometimes you'll roll what's called like a 5d6, which means roll 6-sided dice 5 times. So I'm going to roll a 6-sided dice. I'm going to roll it 5 times. And normally what you do, that's your damage roll. So you add them all up, and that's going to be the result, right? So we actually did this already. You remember, I created a variable called sum in the first homework. I said equal to 0. All I have to do is set the sum equal to the sum plus the number. So I'm going to create a number here, which is going to be our, I'm going to take this thing this is my dice roll. I'm going to shove it into this variable called number. And remember how we added sum is equal to sum plus number? Same exact idea. I'm taking this dice roll, I'm adding it to the sum here. Okay? Sum lives outside of this loop. And here's my number. At the very end, I'm going to print out that the sum of the dice rolls is. Okay? Roll a 6-sided dice. I'm going to roll it 5 times. And I take 1 plus 3 plus 4 plus 4 plus 1. And that's my damage. Roll 6-sided dice again. I get 21 as my damage. It's adding up the number. Let's step through this one more time. I'm going to roll a 6-sided dice 5 times. Sum is currently 0. Step. This number here represents my dice roll. So here, this is my number, is 4. I'm going to take my number 4 plus the sum, shove it back into sum, so sum is now 4. Repeat. Roll a new dice. In this case, it's 6 now. Add it to sum, and then update the value of sum itself. Because now it's 10. Repeat. Roll a new dice. Happens to be 6 again. Add it back into sum. 16. Continue rolling dice until this num rolls goes to 0. Now I add 4 to it, so sum is now 20. I still have one more roll left. I roll 6 and add to sum, so it's 26. Okay. This is how I add up all the numbers in the roll. Questions on this so far? I know some of you guys aren't able to follow. I'm going to put this up on Zool so you guys can get this. Because I'm going to give you guys lab after break on this so you guys can do some review on it. So let me go over Nestor's question because he asked a good one. How would you set it up so that you would roll a 6-sided dice 5 times, then also a 4-sided dice 10 times, and all those things, right? Well, the easiest way that you can do is once you take this whole thing that you want to repeat, this whole thing, all the way down to here, why don't you take this whole thing and just wrap it in a while loop? Just exactly what I did earlier. I'm going to take this whole thing and just put it inside of a bigger while loop. Can you guys see how big this loop is here? This is going to loop this whole thing over and over again. So watch what happens. I'm going to roll a 6-sided dice 5 times. Get rid of my breakpoint here. So sum is 21. Then I want to roll a 4-sided dice 10 times. It's 22. Then I want to roll a 100-sided dice 40 times. Sum is that. So I'm able to continue to ask for more dice to roll over and over and over again just by putting the whole thing inside of a while loop. And it will just repeat over and over again. What if I wanted to exit the loop? Well, why don't we make it so that if I typed in 0 for the number of sides, I exit. So if num sides is equal to 0, I can just do a break right here. And that'll get me out. So that'll quit the program for me.
And with the break you have further in the program, it will only exit the first while loop it encounters, correct?
Correct. The way the break works is, oh, cool, I have a break here. Let me go see what the while loop is that I should break. Oh, it goes up the chain, goes up in the file to find the loop. It's basically the first statement that it belongs to, which is this case here. Okay. All right, so that was the homework. I think we should take a break, and then you guys come back.